The scariest nursing home I ever worked at, story time. So in my early 20s, I got a job as a cleaner in this really old nursing home / rehabilitation center that we'll call Premier Living. Now this place was 3 stories high and it was winged off in 8 different sections. It'd have your older folks over here, very sick people over here, rehabilitation over there, addiction over here. And then downstairs there were 2 floors. You had the morgue and then the basement below the morgue. And when I tell you that was the creepiest damn place I ever been, it was terrifying. So up on the 3rd floor, we had this room that was called the sunroom, and it was where all the windows were open, kind of like a play area for the elderly people, and they'd go in there throughout the day, play cards, Yahtzee, bingo, just different board games. They'd watch TV. Sometimes they'd smoke and talk. But the real reason it was called the sunroom was because every evening when the sun went down and it started to get dark, all the patients with sundown syndrome would start acting up in that room. I mean, they would go from talking just like I am right now to sitting there like this. And you would gradually see their face change, and they would turn into a whole different person. If you didn't know what sundown syndrome was and it was your first time dealing with it, you would think they were possessed. There was one elderly woman who would just be talking just like this, playing cards or whatever, and then all of a sudden, when the sun went down, she'd go... She would breathe so loud when she did it, she sounded like a dog panting. It freaked me out. Another resident had this baby doll, and she carried it everywhere, and she treated it like it was her own baby. She took great care of it. But when that sun went down, she'd turn on that baby. She'd switch up so fast. One minute she'd be, I love the baby so much, to banging its head on the table. One of the coolest things about working in a nursing home is that you're dealing with all these older people who have lived a lifetime. They all have a past, and every past is different. So they would tell you the coolest stories. They'd tell you stories that were real about their life, and then they would tell you like their legends and folklore from where they were from. For example, Miss Ming, she would tell us these stories about folklore and legends in Japan. One of those stories was that in Japan, there is a ghostly woman, or this beastly type woman, who stands so many feet tall, has long black hair, sharp nails, and she's so tall that she can see up into like 2nd, 3rd story windows. Miss Ming was always telling us about this thing, and as Miss Ming's brain continued to deteriorate, at night she began screaming, saying that this thing was standing at the window watching her. A lot of nights they would have to sedate Miss Ming because she swore this thing was standing or floating at her window. But what freaked me out was one night the nurses called me into her room to help them change her bedpan and her sheets and stuff, and Miss Ming was kind of heavy set, so they would roll her over and I would change the sheet. As I was putting the sheet on the bed, I stretched my arm across, and when my peripheral vision, like when I glanced up at the window, I could have sworn I saw this pale white face, dark eyes, long hair, just like gleaming into the window. I jumped back and dropped everything, and the nurses are like, what the hell's wrong with you? Like, put the sheet on the bed. And Miss Ming is like, you saw her, didn't you? You saw her, didn't you? And I'm like, I don't know what I saw. We also had this woman that we'll call Cheryl, who said her husband Albert was a hitman and that he had killed thousands of people throughout their marriage. I'll have to make a video about Cheryl all on its own because that story is so long but interesting. So long story short, while he's gone, she's going through some of their stuff, and she finds a bin out in the garage, and it's full of these notebooks, his journals. Allegedly, she found her husband's kill books where he spoke in detail about the victims, who they were, where they were from, why he killed them. I often wondered if he was a hitman or if he was just a serial killer. Don't know for sure. Now, one of the nurses did report this to the police, but the police said there was no way it could be true. She had to be out of her mind, but I often wondered, was she telling the truth and they just didn't want to investigate it? I don't know. Then there was Mr. Joe. Now, Mr. Joe was an old retiree. He'd been at the home for about 5 years when I started there, and he was probably like 90, 91, somewhere in there. Now, Mr. Joe was really cool, really sweet, always respectful, but sometimes late at night, he would get very scared, and he would swear that there was something standing in the room with him. He would say this thing is standing at the foot of the bed, on his pillow, laying next to him, on the ceiling, it's always with him, following him, and it won't leave him alone until he's dead. But later, his daughter told us that it was his own son that he had shot and killed. Apparently, the son had snuck out of the house. Mr. Joe woke up, thought it was an intruder breaking into the house, but it was a son who had came home late, and Mr. Joe grabbed his pew-pew and unalived him, and then when they cut the lights on and realized it was his son, he just went off the deep end. But the creepiest thing that happened that actually made me quit my job was what Mr. Rick did. So Mr. Rick was about 74 years old. His family admitted him into the nursing home, claiming that he was out of control and they couldn't handle him anymore and he was getting into trouble and he needed to be monitored and supervised, so they put him in the nursing home. Mr. Rick was 74 years old. He was still mobile. He could get up, walk around. Hell, he'd jog around the nursing home sometimes. He was in great shape. But his family admitted him into the nursing home, stating that he was out of control and they couldn't handle him anymore. So I go into work around 7 o'clock that evening. I was 30 minutes late, and it had been storming throughout the day. But that night we had some bad storms come through, and I mean, boom, just thunder shaking the ground, lightning, tornado warnings. It was rough. So around 10 p.m., lights are out, TVs are off, we're making our rounds, And I'm walking around, I'm thinking, something just kind of feels off, but I don't know what it is. Next thing I know, nurses are running down the hallway, the power goes out, and I'm like, what is going on, y'all? And she said, Mr. Rick is missing. Come on, we gotta find Mr. Rick, hurry up. So of course I throw my mop down to the side, we take off, we split up, and I'm paired up with another nurse. And we all start going around searching for Mr. Rick. Now we knew the place was on lockdown, and there was no way for him to get in or out of this place, so we knew he was there somewhere, we just had to find him. So me and this nurse, we go downstairs towards the morgue in the basement, and we get down to the morgue, and the doctor comes in and says, hey, have y'all seen anybody in here? And we said, no, but we're looking for Mr. Rick. Why? He said, because one of our cadavers is missing. I said, what? Where would it go? What do you mean a cadaver is missing? One of the bodies was missing out of the morgue. The doctor said, I don't know, but it didn't just walk off. Somebody took it. Sorry, I had to take a break. But anyways, me and this nurse are standing in the hallway, side by side, and when we get towards the beginning of the next hallway, we see this figure standing down at the end of that hallway we were just at. She looks closer and says, that guy looks weird. Look at his face. His head's dropped down. I said, yeah, he does look weird. Something's wrong with him. It kind of looked like Mr. Rick was standing there holding his head down like this. But when she got closer, she said, that's not Mr. Rick. And when I got closer, I said, that man's naked. That dude is stark naked, and his skin don't look right. Well, why does he look purple like that? What? And then she realized, wait a minute, that ain't Mr. Rick. That's the cadaver. I said, well, if that's the cadaver, how's he standing there? She said, I don't know. But then the cadaver, the body, picked his head up, and his eyes was open, and he was looking at us. Well, then his head drops again, and this dead body starts walking towards us, and it picks up pace to where it looks like it's running at us. So I said, oh, hell no, this I'm out. When I tell you, I didn't give a shit. I took off running. Yes, I left her there. She was screaming, where are you going? I said, fuck this and fuck you and fuck y'all. I'm done. I'm out. So the next day, everybody was laughing at me because we all found out it was Mr. Rick. He stole the body from the morgue and was standing behind it, holding it up, making it move. That's why it looked like it was walking on its own. I don't care they were laughing at me. I was out. Just picture that, seeing someone hold a dead body at the end of a hallway, making it look like it was walking around and stuff. Yeah, I was done with that job. And I didn't go back there, but I did go to another nursing home, which was even worse. If you want to hear more about the nursing homes, let me know in the comments. I love to share.
Okay, fine. It's story time. Boom, boom, it's story time. Boom, boom, paranormal Chicago activity. We catch you. That's me. And this is a recap. We in a werecat's lair. I call her Miss Puss and Bitch. Her and her minions, meowians, they reaping me, Papa, Phoenix. We trying to fight them off. We trying to do our best. Our best is not the best because Miss Puss and Bitch, yeah, she got a whole lot of minions and we already been through a lot of shit. Our energy is spent. Miss Evangeline two-way mirror our ass and tell us that, oh yeah, it's a gold dagger that Miss Puss and Bitch got and it actually belonged to Phoenix daddy. That will destroy the fourth flower. You need to go find it. My brain, I'm tired. Somehow, some way, I knew what it looked like because I was feeding off of Phoenix energy and her memories and boom, it came to us. But see, that's what the problem. Papa trying to pierce the flower with the dagger, but it's not going. So I move in to touch the dagger and boom, I'm dead. Went to the afterlife, seen my family and everything, but they some assholes. They closed the door to the family afterlife and told my ass to go home, right? Now I'm back in this reality and Miss Puss and Bitch got more of her meowians down there reaping havoc. Okay, so boom. When I had touched that dagger, it low-key blew my ass back to the wall. So I wasn't in the middle of the fray that was going on. When I come back from the spirit realm, I'm trying to put two and two to figure out what the hell is going on, y'all. All types of shit is. Papa got demon dogs out here biting these motherfucking rare cats in half. Phoenix up here whirling and twirling like the white peacock off of Kung Fu Panda. All the tips of her feathers turn into razor blades, so she chopping them down. Miss Puss and Bitch sitting up here looking like a proud mammy watching all her meowians go around trying to fuck up Papa and Phoenix. And I am pushed to my limit, my absolute limit. Me and Papa make eye contact and he say two words. Lage Lanmo. Haitian for release death. And the whole world stopped. There is an entity. I don't know who she is. I know that she is somewhat like a banshee. She buried real deep down in my subconscious. Like, Phoenix is bad. But her? Oshun don't even speak her name. She is simply known as Lamo. And that's death. She comes out of me. Picture me with long black hair down to the floor. A silk sheath nightgown with spaghetti straps and it's hunter green. Eyes completely black, no whites. Long gnarly fingers and nails that are just as long and like they kind of fuse together so you really don't see the beginning or the ending of her nails to her skin. Her teeth are like piranha's teeth. Her skin color is like that ghoulish color. I look towards Pussin' Bitch and she is absolutely stone white. When all my intent is focused on pushing Bitch, Lamo is following my attention. Lamo blinked out of existence, came back into this universe 50 feet away from me and 100 feet closer to Pussin' Bitch. I blinked and Lamo, she moved again. She went from here to here to here. Bitch, I felt like I was watching The Grudge hunt down her next prey. I blinked one more time and when I opened up my eyes, I swear to God, Lamo had her hands around Pussin' Bitch face. When Lamo pulled her face back from Pussin' Bitch, you could see the soul strand from Pussin' Bitch going straight into Lamo. Pussin' Bitch trying to do whatever the fuck she can to break away from her, but it ain't happening. It ain't happening. The more she struggled and panicked, the more Lamo sucked her spirit out of her and smiled while she was doing it. Lamo slid one hand behind Pussin' Bitch head, and the other hand she stretched out towards. There is now purple plasma coming from her fingertips directly into my heart shot. Bitch, when I tell you supercharged, ha ha, supercharged. It was too much energy for me to take in. I'm literally feeling like I'm finna explode. Out of nowhere, Phoenix come over and she put her hands on both my shoulders. Now she getting supercharged. Lamo stopped feeding off of Pussin' Bitch, which makes the energy feed from her to me and then back to Phoenix cut off. It feel like we just got hit with 10 tons of electricity, so me and Phoenix low-key on the ground trying to catch our breath. It feel like 10 tons of electricity just got thrown at me and Phoenix, so me and her is on the floor, we trying to breathe. We look up at the podium and Pussin' Bitch is now a motherfucking mummy. I look around the room, all her minions turned into ash. Papa get to saying some type of incantation. I don't really know what he was saying because it's a whole lot of Haitian. I'm not that great at it. Now, Papa and Lamo is having this little conversation. Don't really know what they saying because, again, it's in Haitian. I ain't that good at it. But Lamo floats over to the flower. She takes the flower in her hand and she blows on it. When she blow on it, the flower disintegrates. Then she looked back at me and she whoop right up to my face. I don't know what else to call it other than a whoop, because like out of nowhere she whoop right up to my face. You know what I'm saying? She puts a cross on my third eye. She kissed it and then she went back into. I am absolutely buzzing with energy. We got 4 flowers down. We got 1 more to go. Now this last flower, this one is going to be a doozy because I told y'all the person who got this flower is actually a very high ranking, very powerful motherfucking vampire wizard type situation, and his family actually own 2 major news companies. We not finna get into no names because I'm not finna get in trouble for you. But with all this new energy running through me, baby, I can take down God if you wanted me to. But before we can get to the next flower, we got a bigger problem because Phoenix is free and her daddy Dagger is sitting right here out in the open. Now see, this is the part that I didn't know. This Dagger apparently has the abilities to break whatever bond that Oshu got over Phoenix to be trapped in me. I can't touch it because it will end me and release her. Which brings me to my beef with this bitch. Did you really just try to sacrifice me so you could get freed? Phoenix gonna tell me some damn calm down. I was keeping track. I knew you had a couple of lives left. So you sacrificing me. Really? Now I'm hurt and I'm pissed the fuck off because what you mean you just tried to fucking sacrifice me? Bitch, I am in this motherfucking world with these powers and I don't want them. I didn't ask for you to be trapped into me. It's been plenty of times where I could have sat up here and killed your ass off and I didn't because I felt like you deserved to be set free when it was time for you to be set free, because what you got going on with Oshun ain't got shit to do with me. So me and Phoenix get to tussling because bitch, you just fucking sacrificed me. When me and Phoenix get like this, we pure light. Okay, we going back and forth, and Papa can't do shit because he the Prince of Darkness. What the fuck can he do against 2 light demons, right? Oh, in the midst of me and Phoenix fighting, we hear something say, "Bring me the bird." That made me stop because, bitch, what the fuck was that? Phoenix looking around. Who the hell just said that shit? We had a different voice talking about how do we bring you the bird? Like, how do we bring the bird down? What tactics do we use? It's a fucking Phoenix. Me, Phoenix, Papa, we following the voice. Now, on the altar where Miss Pussin' Bitch is, it's a mirror, a little handheld mirror. In the mirror, that's the fucking vampire. The vampire is sitting up here in his fucking lair giving out orders to his little minions. Y'all gotta be careful with mirrors. You have no idea the powers that mirror hold. You ever walked into a room and you felt like somebody was watching you and you know for a fact that ain't nobody in there and ain't no cameras, but it's a mirror in there? Somebody watching your ass. This vampire man is terrifying. I mean terrifying like Big Daddy Vampire from Resident Evil terrifying. Big Daddy Vampire is sitting around this table with 3 other entities and they are harpy. What is a harpy? A harpy is half bird, half woman, warrior bitch. Somewhat like Valkyries. However, Valkyries have morals and they actually are honorable beings. Harpies, they're not. They're like mercenaries of the underworld. Big Daddy Vampire Man hand each of the harpies a little brown leather bag. And in the brown leather bag, it got some liquid vials in it, okay? These vials is supposed to be able to burn through Phoenix and get rid of her. One of the harpies say, I'll be the one to do it. I hate that. Apparently, Phoenix got bad blood with the harpies because of a battle that happened between the good supernaturals and the bad supernaturals, and they low-key left Phoenix to die, and that's how Ocean got a hold of her. Big Daddy Vampire Man heard Phoenix growl through the mirror. He phases, literally, in the blink of an eye, phased right in front of the mirror. All he says while looking directly at us is, they survived, and then he punches the mirror out. I look at Papa, he look at me. I said, so now we got to figure out what a big bad vampire man is. He said, yeah, but I think I already know where he is, so let's go. And then we were off to the next part. Bye, y'all.
His family home was infested with spirits, and some were pure evil. This story was sent in from one of my followers, and he would like to remain anonymous. He says he's been wanting to share it, but he still holds a lot of emotional pain about it, and it took him a while to sort of gain the courage to type it out. Around 6 years ago, he, his mother, and his father and their 2 dogs moved into a 3-bedroom home. There were also 2 extra rooms that were unoccupied, sort of underneath the home. He said these rooms were kind of like a basement, and they were lined up underneath their bedrooms. And he said they'd lived there about 1.5 years until things started taking a turn. It all started with just him. Late at night, he would hear a thumping coming from underneath his bedroom floorboards. It was almost like somebody was knocking up underneath. And he said this went on and off for like 2 months. He even went to his mother about it, letting her know that there's some kind of a knocking coming from underneath his floor, and she was just like, it's nothing, and brushed it off. And then one Monday, when his mother was home alone after he had gone to school, she went into her bedroom and she also heard the knocking. Now, their bedrooms were all kind of next to each other, and there was another extra empty room under hers, and this knocking was like irradiating through all the bedroom floors. And then the knocking sounds went from like a steady knock like this to a really aggressive one, and then it would go quiet, and then the next thing she knows, she hears like an explosion sound coming from underneath the floor. He mentioned that a little later on, after more were home, they went down into one of the rooms where that explosion sound happened, and it was really hot out at the time, mind you, but when they opened the door to that room, they were hit with like freezing cold temperatures and just this uneasy feeling. He said that there had been a cupboard down there with a latch locking it closed. It had been ripped out of the wood and everything inside it was thrown out across the room. They just kind of left it how it was, backed out, and locked the door. And then about a week goes by and he's staying home the next Monday because he's sick and the father was at work. And while they're just sort of hanging around the house, a freaking glass flies across the room and shatters. And things only kept getting worse from there. He began having sleep deprivation. He was falling asleep in class because he was having these awful dreams at night and his closet door would come flying open. So then they went and got a pastor to do a cleansing. And everything was okay for about 3 months until it wasn't. So then one night their poodle dog started going crazy, barking, coming from the living room. So he and his mother get up to go check it out, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary at first until they noticed their cross that had been hanging on their wall was flipped completely upside down, still hanging on the wall, upside down. So his mother screams for his father and the cross falls off the wall. And then he said, to put it into perspective for you, that was nothing compared to what happened that night. So mom's in the bed and she set up a spot for her son on the floor and he was dozing off when all of a sudden Guys, his body was ripped awake as he was drug across the room and thrown into the desk. So the father jumps up out of bed and he's screaming and cursing whatever the heck is in this room. And a freaking Bible comes flying across the room and smashes him in the side of the face. So they get up to flee the home and they're all freaking out and gathering things up. And he said, as he is standing there waiting for them to exit the house, holding his pillow and blanket, all of a sudden a shooting pain goes down his back. His mom checks it out and there are scratch marks all down his back. So they left the house, and 4 hours later, they did have to return because the father needed to go inside to get some work clothes. So they kind of stayed in the car waiting. And he says that as he sat in the car, he looked up into the window and there was a dark, evil figure, a presence sort of standing up in the frame of the window. Even though they had left, after a while, they really had nowhere else to go, nothing permanent. So they had to return, and weird things just kept happening. Like the temperature in the home had dropped like a refrigerator, or there would be weird smells coming out of nowhere all throughout the house. There were so many weird spirits there, men and women, but there were some that he and his mother saw that were different. They were just pure evil. So then on another day, it was daytime and the mother had gone to the store and he was home alone. And he said he saw this black mass come flying through into the house near him. And he saw it coming and he ran out of the house as fast as he could. It ended up in the yard and he could see through into the house. This thing was just pure darkness. They eventually looked up this house and the previous owners, and they heard some stories. They found out that the family that lived there a few years before them had their furniture literally thrown out of the house. They even went around taking photos, and they said they saw 8 entities hanging out in the front side of the home alone, along with something unidentifiable sitting up on the freaking roof. Okay, and then this gets really sad. A few months later, the mother, who was only 39 years old, got sick in that house and she died. Nobody is certain on the root cause of her death. Everything kept continuing to get worse and worse, including doors slamming in his face. And then he said their animals started dying. The father had met somebody after the mother had passed, and she was shoved from the outside staircase leading to the front door and got pretty injured. And that was the moment that it was like, enough is enough. We don't need any more fatalities. And they got the heck out of there. He says to this day, he knows that that house was infested with spirits and absolute demonic activity. He said that his family had lasted the longest in that house, and other people that would move in after only lasted like a few months or maybe a year at most. That since they left, he has never returned to the home. What a freaking wild experience that must have been. How horrendous, horrific, and tragic. I am sure he will be up reading these comments. You can let him know what your thoughts are. I can't even imagine. If you have a creepy story of your own, I would love to hear it. And if you're new here, you gotta follow for more creepy story time.
More than 100 years ago, molasses crashed through Boston. Welcome back to Creepy History, where we discuss stories from the past that are still unsettling today. I have all of my notes in front of me. I'm just going to be reading off my notes. I did research, typed it into a document, so if you see me looking away, it's the same thing I do with my scary stories, put them in a document, and I just read through it because I have a horrible memory. But anyway, let's get into this event. In the middle of the day on January 15th, 1919, Boston's North End was full of residents and workers who were venturing outdoors to enjoy the warm weather. Around 1 p.m., they heard a low rumble. At first, many people thought it was a Boston elevated train approaching, but within minutes, they realized something was terribly wrong. Turns out a 50-foot tall tank full of industrial-grade molasses had ruptured, which sent a 2.3 million gallon wave of molasses rushing through the crowded area. Okay, so what is industrial-grade molasses? I looked it up. It's a thick, dark, nutrient-rich byproduct of sugar production intended for non-food, industrial, and agricultural uses. It is primarily used as a cost-effective, high-energy animal feed additive, a fermentation substrate for producing alcohol, MSG, and citric acid, and it's extremely thick and sticky. The molasses tank had been built by Purity Distilling Company just a few years earlier before the incident in 1915. The tank was 50 feet tall and rose over the Boston Elevated Railroad tracks that ran right next to it. Tankers would deliver the molasses to Copp's Hill Wharf, where it was pumped into the tank. Despite the tank being relatively new, locals actually began noticing that the tank was leaking molasses. When they complained, Purity Distilling painted the tank brown in order to disguise the oozing sticky molasses. What freaking assholes. Later on, structural engineers would say the tank's walls were way too thin to hold all of that heavy molasses. And because of those thin walls, the warm weather, and a new large shipment of molasses, the tank ruptured. A literal wave of molasses rushed through the north end at about 35 miles per hour. It knocked a train off its tracks, crushed buildings, moved a firehouse and other buildings off their foundations, and unfortunately suffocated both humans and animals. Not only was the molasses crashing through the area, but debris from the tank was like crashing through this area as well. I'm assuming it's made out of like metal and sharp, probably. Boston police, cadets from the USS Nantucket, and the Red Cross rushed to help. Despite their efforts, 21 people lost their lives and 150 people were injured. Most of the people who passed were employees of the places that delivered the molasses and the place who held the tank. The other victims included children and a firefighter who had just gone to sleep at the firehouse. Cleanup was, of course, difficult and practically impossible until city workers realized that salt water broke down the molasses, so they began spraying the area with water pumped from the harbor. Even though locals had expressed their concerns regarding the leaky tank, the tank's owners still tried to blame the incident on anyone but themselves. They used the excuse that maybe someone plotted this and, did this on purpose. In 1925, a court-appointed auditor ruled that the negligence by the tank's owners was to blame for the tank's collapse and the loss of life and property. This Boston tragedy led to major changes in the way the United States regulated industries, ensuring engineers sign and seal plans, building inspectors need to examine projects, and architects need to show their work. This is kind of like one of those things that a tragedy leads to something good. It's horrible that this happened, but because this happened, I feel like it's probably saved a lot of lives since then, because something like this probably would have just happened again if they didn't come in and change all of their rules and regulations. But this obviously was the manufacturer's fault, and I cannot even believe that they tried to blame somebody else for their mistake. I feel like this historical event is creepy because could you imagine just being out on a regular, totally normal day and then a huge wave of thick, dark brown, sticky molasses just comes barreling towards you? It's also creepy just knowing that the rich assholes who owned the company that made the tank were capable of blaming this tragedy on someone else. People with money are just not our friends, and they can't be trusted. I'd like to share my condolences to all of the people who lost their lives and their loved ones. I hope they're resting easy somewhere way cooler than this place. Anyways, now we both know about the Great Molasses Flood. Let me know what creepy history you want me to talk about next.
We hear a lot of warning ghost stories about Ouija boards, don't we? Some people think they're pure folklore, other people would not go near a Ouija board with a 10-foot pole. Now, this ghost story may make you believe the latter. It's quite scary and allegedly did happen during the 1990s. A woman told it me as it happened to her, so here goes. Around the age of 13, Molly, at the time being a girl, lost her father. Really tragic, sudden death. They got on amazingly well and she missed him dearly. Life was a real struggle after that. Around the age of 20 in university, a best friend convinced her, who was kind of into witchcraft, things like this, to use a Ouija board and perhaps make contact with her father. So, as nervous as she was about it, she was also really excited and agreed to it. And one night, the girls set up candles in their university room and began to conjure up what she thought was her father. Now, he came through almost instantly, but it probably didn't help that Molly was asking leading questions. Straight away, she thought the ghost was her dad, asking was he proud of her, Was he reunited with grandma? All these, set questions of giving ultimately the spirit information. And absolutely it claimed to be her dad. It told her things that she thought only her dad would really know. And it was convinced that indeed her father was sending messages from beyond the grave. The Ouija board session was heartwarming, she described it as. But in the end, the two stopped. Said goodbye, the spirit said goodbye back, and that was that. Now, fast forward 2 years, she moves into her first house with her boyfriend. Now, he starts to report an unpleasant male presence in the house. He said he'd seen the shadow figure of what looked like a male silhouette around 6 foot tall. Around this time, Molly also began to experience brushing on her cheek at night. But she wasn't scared by this. Her father used to do it to her as a child to send her off to sleep. Also, cupboard doors would start banging on their own, pots and pans, and when she would shout out, "Dad, stop it," it would stop. So she was no longer scared by this presence. She thought it was her father. She thought he was making contact with her. And then eventually the stroking on the face progressed to the feeling and the sensation of her hair being twizzled around a finger, which was also another comforting thing her father always did for her as a child. So she talked her boyfriend right down several times when he was terrified and he thought it was something darker. She was like, "No, it's my dad. He's still looking out for me. Don't be scared of him." And that's how it went. Now there's a particular night where the haunting's getting stronger. The TV channels are going do across all the different stations on their own. The lights were beginning to flicker and the cupboard doors were banging relentlessly where they wouldn't stop when she shouted out to her father, "Will you please stop? You're scaring us." So she goes out into the kitchen to address her father directly and sees this shadow figure dart behind the other door that's in there. And she thought, that's strange, that's much taller than my father ever was. And she says, "Dad, stop it now. You're not welcome in this house anymore if this is how you're going to act." And then a sinister voice whispered down her ear, "I'm not your father." With that, she screamed, told her boyfriend what had happened, and he was that terrified. The pair of them sought refuge in the church that night. And ultimately, after a priest came to the house and did several blessings, she said after a period of months, the paranormal activity eventually dwindled, but a big part of that was ignoring the ghost, not interacting with it anymore and feeding it with energy, which she was giving it in bountiful, plentiful amounts because she thought it was her dad. Now, this is clearly something I think that was conjured up, and she does, through the Ouija board and had attached to her, and only when she'd gone on to live her own life, perhaps with this, other male in a serious relationship, the apparition or whatever it was had become jealous and it began to build up a stronger sense about it to torment the pair. And perhaps if it hadn't, unveiled itself to the point it couldn't take it back and she had given it energy for a long period of time, the haunting could have got violent to either of them, likely the boyfriend. So consider this a ghoulish warning against Ouija boards.
Hello and welcome back to a series of anonymous petty events, the Toxic Tea Party. The series is brought to you by toxicity and ungodly amounts of pet. This is the Medic Part 2. We have an update. I gotta do it. It's my necklace. It's down here if you like it. It's cute. Now onto the story. Update to the Mediocre Medic Part 1. This may not be the update that everyone wanted, but it is certainly the cherry on top of an already perfect petty plan. So it's been a little over a week now since the P for Petty bomb went off. This man's birthday and court date have come and gone, and while he is still not in jail, I made sure to read the terms of his probation line by line, because that information is important. It specified harshly that he was not to be in any establishment that primarily sells intoxicants, such as a bar, dispo, Kratos Lounge, etc. I updated my group chat with this information, and of course they wanted to celebrate finally without fear of running into this poisonous Peter Pan of a man-child. We go to dinner first. Feeling very good after a few shots there, we hit a couple of other places before we finally hit that same local country dance bar that my aforementioned friend works security at. And who is the very first face that I see when we get inside? You guessed it, Mr. Medic himself. Mr. Mediocre Medic, specifically. And not only that, he is also there with the same girl from the previous weekend. So I was strategic. I whipped out my phone before I made another step and just recorded. You know, in these situations, you do have to be strategic. Him dancing around the bar logos in the background, and of course, all the booze. You can't miss the booze at the bar. Tucked my phone in my pocket and kept walking. When this man locked eyes with me in this club, he looked like a deer in the headlights. Soon to be Bambi's mother. Rest in peace. My friends, however, also saw him and were looking at him like they wanted to rip his throat out and toss it across the dance floor. So things didn't pop off at first. Eventually, he came to dance in front of us for whatever reason. Girl, you know the reason. You know the reason. And we had a large group of women, including my friends and I, because we didn't know any of these women. They just took the opportunity to embarrass a man. Women in men's fields. Giving him the middle finger with both hands from across the bar. Leaving him so embarrassed that he left the dance floor mid-song. Mission accomplished. With the drinks flowing, I sent him a text on an app that was essentially, I hope you enjoy that year in jail once your probation gets the videos I've taken tonight, and then deleted the app. Ooh. But I wasn't done. He was still present and poisoning my time. So I asked the bartender to send him a bar mat shot. Ew. I walked calmly up to the girl that he was there with and did the only thing that a girl's girl should do in that situation. I showed her all the proof, including the 100+ phone calls and drunk messages that he sent me the previous weekend after being at the bar with her, as well as the terms of his probation that stated that he wasn't supposed to be in the bar to begin with. She looked at it, nodded her head, and we went our separate ways. She would later add me on socials to ask me some more questions, and of course, I'm happy to answer. I truly hope that she's safe from that man's bullshit, but I wasn't done, simply for my own satisfaction. And for the satisfaction of our petty friends, okay? Because here we all are again, lying in wait to find out what you have for us next. We ended up getting a hotel room in the city that we were in because none of us were in any condition to drive home. And I proceeded to get his martial arts coach to come visit me while I was there. Now, we have a date tomorrow night. So for the final update, I do want to say thank you to this lying, low-down loser that we have unaffectionately referred to as Mr. Medic, Mr. Mediocre Medic. Again, not for being a toxic scourge on my life for the past 2 years, but for possibly being the stepping stone that I needed to the man that he idolizes so much. Younger, stronger, more talented, and more ambitious than he ever could be. Oh, the writing is immaculate. And has shown more effort in a few weeks than this man ever did in 2 years' time. That I'll thank him for. And I'll wish him the best in the same way as the song I'll Pray For You by Jaren and The Long Road to Love does. I'm sorry that this isn't a more eventful update, but your girl is free and thriving again once more. Don't ever let your toxic situationship stop you from possibly finding your husband, ladies. And stay petty, friends. Yeah, stay petty, friends. Personally, I think that it's even more hilarious that you got a giant group of women to just flip off this douchebag in the middle of the dance floor, make him leave. Get video proof, again, firsthand, and then texting him that you had video proof and to enjoy his time in jail. I mean, I'm sure there will be another update coming soon, because if he gets violated the way that he should be, he will be sitting in county not long after. Anywho, rated on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the least petty, 10 being the most. If you have a story of your own that you want to submit, you can do so on the link tree in my profile. We will see you all at the next episode. Stay petty, friend.
Let's read a scary story. My name is Eli, and when I was 14, this story took place. I'm from southern Mississippi, and I've lived in the country all my life. I grew up hunting and fishing with my parents and grandparents. Last year was the first year I was allowed to start hunting by myself, and it went really well. Because of that, I felt pretty confident going into this year. It was mid-November, and I was hunting in the swamps along the Pearl River. I had been in the same stand a few times before, but all the wildlife had been acting way stranger than usual. I tried not to think too much about it and went back to the stand again. But this time, I saw absolutely nothing. No deer, no squirrels, no birds, nothing at all. That alone freaked me out, and since I wasn't seeing anything anyway, I decided to climb down from the stand a little earlier than usual. Normally, I would stay until about 10 or 15 minutes after dark, but that night I got down right when it started to get dark. I had parked my little Toyota Tacoma about a mile away. So here's where things started getting really scary. I began walking back toward my truck. I'm a bigger dude, about 6 feet tall and around 250 pounds. I know that sounds crazy for a 14-year-old, but please don't judge. Usually it would take me around 10 to 15 minutes to casually walk back to my truck. But something that night just felt wrong. About 7 or 8 minutes into the walk, the woods went completely silent. I've seen enough scary videos and movies to know that when the woods suddenly go quiet, that's a terrible sign. So I started speed walking. I took my gun off my shoulder and chambered around. I had heard stories about black bears and other predators being in that area, so I was already paranoid. By now, it was completely dark. I could barely see my hand in front of my face, so I turned on my headlamp. There was a creek to my left and swamp woods to my right. I kept looking around as I walked. Then, all of a sudden, I saw movement. Something big darted behind a tree. That scared the living hell out of me, so I started running toward my truck as fast as I could. When I got about 200 yards away from my truck, I heard heavy footsteps behind me. At that point, I pushed myself as hard as I possibly could. I ran with everything I had left and made it about 50 yards away from my truck. Then the footsteps stopped, but I didn't stop running. As soon as I reached my truck and opened the door, I heard a blood-curdling scream come from the swamp behind me. My truck was parked up on a small hill in a field with about an 8 to 10 foot embankment that dropped down into the swamp. I jumped inside the truck, locked the doors, and started the engine. The moment the truck started, I looked toward the embankment. That's when I saw it. A tall, hairy creature standing down in the swamp, looking up over the embankment at me. This thing had to be huge, because even though it was standing at the bottom of the embankment, I could clearly see its shoulders above the edge. I immediately slammed the gas and took off. I was going about 70 miles an hour across that field in my old 96 Tacoma, which is pretty rare for that truck. Moral of the story, don't walk a mile into the swamp just to kill a deer. I will most likely never go back to that stand again. Cherish your life more than you cherish killing a deer. I have a gut feeling that if I hadn't made it back to my truck that night, I might not have made it out of those woods alive. Thank you, Eli, for submitting this story. I did some research here, and it looks like what I can find that's the most similar to this sighting is the Chautauqua monster, which is a cryptid specifically found in Mississippi swamps. And it is often described as a 7-foot-tall ape-like creature, or kind of like a Bigfoot-type cryptid. And legend says that this creature had escaped from a derailed circus train and now lives in the swamps. And even crazier, I looked it up and it says that this is a prominent local myth in southwest Mississippi. And you said you're from southern Mississippi, so I'd be curious to know if you have ever heard of this myth prior to your experience. Again, for sending this story in. If you guys have any stories you'd like me to read, as always, please email them to me and I will get to them if I can. And I will see you in the next one.
Someone who said that I could just call him Andy sent us an email to tell us his weird story about when he found memorabilia that his grandfather had brought home from World War II. He said that this happened a couple of years ago and his grandfather had recently passed away. They were cleaning out his house and it was kind of take what you want and what nobody wants will find a new home for. So up in the attic, he said that there was this box. He said it was not some fancy crate like you see in the movies, just like a plastic carton, like laundry basket size with handles on the sides. And he said that in this box was filled with his grandpa's like World War II memorabilia, like his uniform, pictures, letters, just all kinds of stuff. Nobody else in Andy's family wanted it. And he said, I just couldn't see it just sitting in a thrift store. So I decided that I would take it home. He takes it home that night. He sits it on his coffee table. He's going through this box of things and he's kind of laying everything out. And he said it like kind of hit him like right in the feels because he really did love his grandpa. And he was really sad that he was no longer with him. And he's looking at everything, his uniforms. I think that he said that there was a hat in there, some pictures of him from World War II, and one boot. Not 2 boots, just 1 boot. And he said that he picked up the boot and he looked at it and he just kind of laughed and was like, why just 1 boot? That's so weird. But he kind of sat there and looked at everything for a little bit and starts to put everything back into the box. And he says he picks up the boot and it's almost feeling like it's vibrating. He's like, that's weird. And he starts to reason it in his mind and he thinks, okay, perhaps a mouse has made a home inside of this boot. It has been sitting in my grandpa's attic for who knows how long. So I'm going to take it outside and see if I can find what's causing this to feel like it's vibrating. Walks out on his back patio, kind of turns the boot upside down gently, just trying to get, if there's a mouse in there, trying to get it out. But he says that a mouse doesn't come out, but what does fall out is like this white cloth, like it kind of falls out of the boot. And he says when it hits the ground, you can tell that there's something in it. So he picks up the cloth, opens it up and looks at it. And he says that wrapped inside this cloth, which was tucked into the toe of this boot, was this ring. And he said that on the ring, there was a skull in the middle of it and then some strange markings on the sides. So he picks this ring up, with his bare hands. He's looking at it and he says that he just becomes intensely ill. He said it hits him like a ton of bricks and he actually has to walk over to the railing on his back patio and actually vomit. and he just thinks, okay, it's just been a really long day. I'm really stressed out. I think I just need to get some sleep. So he takes the ring and he just puts it inside with the boot sitting on his coffee table, goes to bed. That night he says that he has the most terrible dreams that he's ever had. He dreams about war and this room with pillars in it and mountains and violence, and it's just awful. And he wakes up, he said he's drenched in sweat, has never had a dream like that before, but just a terrible nightmare. That next day, he does pack up all of his grandpa's stuff back into that box, including the boot. He takes it and he puts it in a closet. The ring he doesn't put back in the box. He actually just tosses it in a coin dish where his like entryway table is. And he said he leaves it there and forgets about it. He says a couple of weeks go by, he doesn't really think about the ring, and then one day he is standing there at his entryway table and he sees the ring and he picks it up and he's kind of turning around in his hands, and he said, I don't know why I did it. I'm just an idiot, but I put the ring on. And when he put the ring on, he said it felt like he was inside of like a vacuum. Like he couldn't hear anything. He couldn't feel anything. He said it felt like his feet weren't even touching the ground. Like all the air had been sucked out of the room and nothing existed outside of like this little bubble that he was contained in. So he said immediately he rips the ring off. Everything goes back to normal, puts the ring away, tosses it back in the dish, and just leaves it there. He says that this does really scare him, and he thinks, okay, I've had some sort of a medical episode. So he does go to the doctor. He has tests done. He has scans done. He let the doctor know what happened. They find nothing. They say you're perfectly healthy. After he puts the ring on, nightmares that he's having become nightly. They become very intense. He said that he's exhausted. He's to the point where he's just not sleeping. He will stay awake until his body just gives out. It goes on like this for a couple of months. One night, he decides that he's going to have friends over. They come into the house. One of the friends that's over is actually a history teacher, loves history, very interested in it. And he tells him, I have my grandpa's World War II stuff if you'd like to see it. The guy's like, yeah, of course, I definitely want to see it. So he brings it out. They're kind of going through everything. And his friend is looking at it. And then he picks up the one boot and he kind of laughs. He's like, just one boot. That's interesting. And then Andy says that this sparks his memory about the ring that is still in that little coin dish on his entryway table. And he's like, actually, this is weird, but this is what I actually found inside the boot. And so he gets the ring, he brings it to his friend. His friend looks at the ring and asks him, do you know what this is? And Andy says, I have no idea what this is. And Andy says, listen, I'm a mechanics guy. I am not into history. It was not really something that interested me. So if I'm telling you this story and other people have heard about this, I'm not an idiot. It's just not my thing. But his friend goes on to tell him that what this looks like is something that's called an SS honor ring. Andy says he has no idea what his friend's talking about. And so his friend goes on to tell him that these rings were basically like this cult-like thing that the Yahtzees would do to their give to their high-ranking officials. They weren't a military award per se. They were more of like a personal keepsake from this guy named Himmler. So he had these rings made, and they were kind of tied to the occult. And they had a skull in the center, and then on the side were runes. And what Himmler believed was that this would keep these people like inside of this cult-like brotherhood. And if they were to fall in battle, the rings needed to be returned to him, where he would put them on an altar and ultimately entrap their souls within his hell castle. Not the official name, but Andy says that he is sitting there just kind of shocked at what his friend is telling him, but his friend also does go on to tell him it is highly likely that this is just a reproduction because these rings are extremely rare. 9,000 of them are buried in a mountain. Maybe a couple of hundred made it back to the US, but it would be highly unlikely that your grandfather would just come across one of these rings. However, lower ranking soldiers could buy reproductions of these rings. So it's probably just a reproduction. It's probably just a fake. Andy says that this does make him feel better, and he asks his friend, well, what do I do? What should I do with it? And his friend is like, I mean, you can take it to a museum and they should be able to tell you if it's legit, but in my opinion, it's probably not. I would just put it back in the boot and just leave it where you found it. Andy kind of takes a sigh of relief and he's like, okay, tosses it back in the dish and just forgets about it. A couple more months go on. Andy is still not sleeping. He is having these terrible nightmares consistently. They will not stop. He says he goes to doctor after doctor after doctor and no one is able to help him. Talking to a friend one day, and the friend says, hey, I go and I see a witch doctor. If you want to give that a try, I can give you her contact info. And he said he is not trying to be rude by calling her a witch doctor. That's what she referred to herself as. At this point, Andy says, I feel like I have nothing to lose, so I call and I make an appointment. The day of the appointment comes, Andy goes, he walks into her office. As he crosses the threshold of the door, he says that the tiniest woman that he's ever seen pops out of this side room, tells him to stop, walks into the waiting area where the entrance is, looks at him, rings this giant gong like 3 times in a row. And Andy says when she rings this gong, he feels so light, like he finally feels like he's not being oppressed. He's super calm, and he's like, oh, okay. And she's like, okay, now you can come in. Let's talk about what's going on. Andy tells this woman everything that he has been experiencing as far as the nightmares, the unease, not being able to sleep, just feeling like he's troubled by something. But he does not tell her about the ring. Andy says that she kind of looks at him for a minute, and then she's like, so there's something dark that's attached to you. It's not you that's dark, but there is something dark attached to you. Andy says he kind of shakes his head and looks at her and is like, I'm going to tell you something, but I feel like I'm going to sound crazy. And she's like, not to me, baby. So he goes on to tell her about the ring, but he also says, but my friend says that when he looked at it, it really probably was just a reproduction, and it's probably not tied to the occult or the cult that this, guy had with these SS officials and blah, blah, blah. This witch doctor looks at him and she was like, it doesn't matter if it's a reproduction or not because items hold energy. Andy asks her, okay, so what am I supposed to do? Do I put it back in the boot? Do I get rid of it? I don't know. So she tells Andy, what you need to do is you need to take this somewhere and you need to put it in water, because water is going to wash all that energy away, but it's going to need to be in water. They talk a little bit more. Andy leaves. A couple days later, he grabs the ring, hooks up his boat. He says he lives near the water, so going out on the water for him was pretty common occurrence. So he hooks up his boat. He goes out, puts it in the water, drives the boat out, and then he says he gets to like the middle of the water where you can't really see the shoreline, and he says he pulls the ring out of his pocket and he just throws it as far as he can. Andy said that when he did this, he was actually expecting like an eerie feeling or some sort of like flash of light or this big fireworks show, but he said it was nothing. It just plopped in the water and that was it. But he said when it did plop in the water, it was like this oppression kind of like left his body and he felt very calm. He went home that night. He said, I slept better than I had in a year. Andy has never felt any want or need to try to retrieve this ring, not like he could anyway. He does find himself often wondering why his grandfather like brought it home and kept it for so long, but he knows that he's never going to get the answer to that, at least not in this life. So he's just happy that he was able to get rid of it and let it go and it no longer affects him. But those SS honor rings, it's a whole rabbit hole that you could fall down. Like it is that we need to talk about that. And they are super rare, so more than likely Andy's friend was right, and this was a reproduction or something that was purchased by like a lower ranking soldier. But either way, yeah, let me know what you think about that. I don't feel very good today, so this is the best that I've got. Thank you for listening, and have a great day.
Why would a creature follow you for years if it's not going to do anything? Gloss on so I can run this mouth. Now focus. Scary story time, Fright Night Files. Dave grew up in the Appalachian Mountains in eastern Kentucky, and he said that when he was around 9 years old, he noticed something one night standing outside of his bedroom window, but it was across the yard near the tree line. It was just this dark figure. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there. So he convinced himself that it must be like something, just a shadow or something, goes to bed, doesn't think much of it. But then he notices like every so often, like once or twice a month, that thing was standing there. But it's about to get so much worse because he was around 11 when his cousin came over to spend the night one night. His cousin noticed it out in the woods and immediately was like, what's that? Who's that? What's going on? And he tells him like, hey, I just see him sometimes. I don't know what it is. I don't know what's going on. The cousin was creeped out because they noticed that every so often that it would get closer to the house. It wasn't really coming out past the woods, but closer. The cousin even asked the dad the next morning, like, hey, were you outside? The dad said no. And, they just kind of let it go. He's 15 now. That thing is standing in the middle of the yard. It's so close that he can make out that it looks like a man, but not really. He said that the arms were longer than it should have been, that the man was taller than it should have been, and that the shoulders were real narrow. Again, it's not really doing anything. It's just kind of standing there, but he's noticing like every time he looks, it comes a little closer, but not too close. But he has noticed that every year it's getting closer to the house. He was a senior in high school. He woke up one night and the thing was standing right outside the window, just pointing at him. Just pointing, that was it. Now, he only saw it that one time, right up against the house. Then he moved 2 towns over. He's in an apartment building. One night he goes to get in bed and he looks out the window and down on the street, that thing is standing on the street. He said that he just keeps seeing it throughout his life. He's like 32 now, but he said he never gets like too close to it and he doesn't know what it wants, which is weird because we all know about skinwalkers skinwalkers and wendigos and all the things, but why would it mess with him to the point of terrifying him but not really do anything? What's the point of that? I get so many emails sent to me of stories of people encountering these things, but they don't really do anything. So why are we so scared of something if it's not going to do anything? So what I want to know is, have any of you seen these things and they've actually done something? Because just standing there and staring at you, yeah, it's scary, but after you hear it so many times, it's not really scary anymore.
I'm going to share a Bigfoot story that someone sent me because if you're late to the party, there have been over 8 reported sightings in Portage County, Ohio over the last 5 days. And while this story comes from Columbus, Ohio, which is not in Portage County, I'm thinking with the time frame, maybe it's the same creature, maybe it migrated, maybe it's unrelated entirely. You decide. I'm just here to share the stories. If you're new here, this is Spooky Scary Storytime, the series where we share listeners' allegedly true stories about the creepiest or most unbelievable things that they've ever seen. The person who sent this story wanted to remain anonymous, but we'll call him D. And D said that in December, he and his mother were Christmas shopping at their normal shopping plaza in Columbus, Ohio. And after Christmas shopping, they decided to go to a different part of town to a movie theater. He did not name the movie theater, so I'm not sure which one this is. I'm sorry. It wasn't quite nighttime, but the sun was going down, so the visibility was still good. And he said that they arrived to the movie theater a little bit early and decided that they were going to drive down the side road next to the movie theater, which they had never been down before, thinking they might kill some time, check out a few stores. They weren't sure what was down that road, so they're driving past the movie theater and they see there's a bunch of loading docks of stores, nothing really exciting, but on the other side of that road was a wooded area, and as they're driving down the road, they spot something, and it looked like it was sitting down. Its back was to them, but sitting next to a dumpster. Its head was down. It appeared to be eating something, and they could tell that it was dark and furry. All of them spotted it as they passed it, but he described its fur as being maybe 4 to 5 inches in length, but not shaggy. It was more similar to that of a sheep. The fur separated into thick strands, and it was sitting flat on its butt with its feet planted flat on the ground. And he said it wasn't wearing shoes, but he couldn't make out the feet because they were just driving at a high speed. He couldn't make out its face. He said it initially looked like a gorilla, but as they passed it, he thought that the size was too large. It was easily 6 feet sitting flat on its butt, which makes him think that standing it would have been around 10 feet. The width of it also struck him as strange because he stands 6 feet tall, and with his arms outstretched, he doesn't think he would be able to wrap his arms around whatever this was. So as soon as they pass it, he looks at his mom looks at him with her eyes bugging out of her head, and she says, "Did you see that?" And he says, "Yeah, turn around." By the time they both realized that they saw it and made the decision to turn around, they were about 2 buildings down. So he's craning his neck looking behind it, but he can't see it from where they are in the road. So she pulls a U-turn, comes back down. That they drove back by the spot where they initially saw it within 30 seconds, but it was completely gone, and he doesn't understand how because of its size. That how it disappeared within seconds, I will never understand, but they actually drove around a little bit looking for it and couldn't find anything. And he said that they were actually so concerned with what they saw that they started looking up reports of escaped zoo animals, thinking maybe it really was a gorilla. Still, both of them agreed that it was probably too large to have been a gorilla. That was just the only logical thing that they could think of. Says up until this experience, they were not the type of family to believe in things like this, but after seeing it with their own eyes, they can't deny that they saw something strange. And looking into reports, he said that he's heard whisperings of similar things in the same area. So now I think it's interesting with all of these new reports coming out in the Portage County area. It's evidently the most concentrated reported sightings in a short time frame since the 1970s. I think this could be related. The Bigfoot Society podcast has been covering this extensively. He has a map on his channel. Some comments that are saying Bigfoots are interdimensional travelers. So I don't know. What do you think?
What would happen if you followed a mimic? Now, I've always wondered this because you hear these stories of someone hearing like their mother knocking at the door or telling them to come in the kitchen. But what would happen if you actually listened to the mimic? Here's a story that might tell you why you should not follow a mimic. There was this young man named Aiden. Now, Aiden lived with his grandfather and his 2 parents. Now, one day, Aiden was hanging out in his bedroom, and he's playing a game. Well, he hears his parents, pull in, and he looks out the window and sees them getting out of the car, unloading some groceries into the house. So he's like, awesome, man, we're going to have something to eat. So he goes back to his game, and then he hears his mother say, Aiden, come in the kitchen. I got some food. And he, at this time was in the middle of a battle. So he's like, hold on, Mom, I'll be there shortly. I'm in the middle of a battle. And she goes, come on, Aiden, hurry up. Come in the kitchen. And all of a sudden, he said he got a phone call. And it was from his mom. And he's like, why is she calling me when she's in the kitchen? So he picks it up. And his mom's like, hey, honey, we're at the grocery store. Do you want us to get you anything? And he goes, what do you mean you're at the grocery store? You already got groceries. You're in the kitchen. And she goes, what are you talking about? We just got to the grocery store. And he looks out the window and sees that their car is not there. And then right at this moment, he hears his mom saying, "You better get in the kitchen right now or you're going to be in trouble. You better come eat." And like, he's like, I got to call you back, Mom. He hangs up. So he goes and he locks his door, and then he calls his mom right back and is like, "Look, when you get home, call me. I'll help you bring in the groceries." So about 25, 30 minutes later, his mom calls him. And she's like, "Honey, we're home. Come outside." And he said he was getting ready to go out of his room, but he looked out his window first, and their car wasn't there. So he's like, "You know what? I don't know what to do because I don't know, like, who really is my mom right now." So as he's sitting in his bedroom, right, he hears his parents come home and come into the house. And all of a sudden, his mom comes up to his door and starts knocking. And she goes, "Aiden, let me in." And he's like, "Not right now, Mom." And she goes, "What are you talking about? Let me in. Unlock this door. Why do you have the door locked?" And he's like, "No, I'm not opening the door." And his mom goes, "All right, I'll just get the key and unlock it." So he grabs like this baseball bat that's chilling in his room, and he's prepared for this thing to come in. And like, at the time, he still thinks whatever, was calling his name in the kitchen, this is them. So he sees the handle jiggle and the door open, and it's really his mom. And he can tell that it is actually his real mom. And she goes, "What are you doing?" And he's like, "Oh, nothing." And he sets the bat down, and she's like, "You're acting weird and stuff. And there's food in the fridge if you're hungry." So he didn't know what to make of that. Like, what did he just experience? And he didn't feel like he could tell his parents about it. So he decided to talk to his grandpa, who was kind of like his best friend at the time. So he goes to his grandpa's room, and he's like, "Grandpa," he's like, "have you ever seen something like you can't explain?" And he goes, "What do you mean?" And he tells the story about like how he thought his mom and dad had came home, he's seen their car and everything, but it wasn't actually them. And the grandpa goes, "Oh no, oh no." And he goes, "What's wrong, Grandpa?" And he says, "Well, when I was a young boy, I grew up in a small Polish village near Warsaw." And he said, "We had this term that was this long Polish word, but it roughly translated into evil twin." And he said they believed there were these evil spirits that could take the form of anyone and would try and trick you and lure you, out into the woods. So his grandpa said, "When I was a young boy, my father had me chopping wood outside. And I hear my grandma's voice coming from the forest. And she's saying, come in the woods. I baked you a pie. Like, come out here. It's nice and warm. Like, you'll like this pie." And he said, he was so hungry, like he almost started to go out into the woods until his father ran and grabbed him and said, "Get back in the house." And his father locked the door and said, "If you hear someone calling you from the woods, don't ever go. Don't respond." So he said, when you encounter an evil twin, as they called it, they will follow you for the rest of your life. And he feared that maybe this thing had followed him here to America, and this is what Aiden had seen. A couple weeks later, his parents are gone, and it's just him and his grandpa, and they're watching this World War II documentary in the living room. Well, all of a sudden, the wind picked up, and a strong breeze pushes the back kitchen door open, and they hear it, open up. So his grandpa's like, "I'll go and close the door real quick, and I better lock it so it doesn't blow open again." So his grandpa goes into the kitchen, but after about 10, 15 minutes, he doesn't come back. So Aiden's like, Grandpa, are you all right?" He goes into the kitchen, the back door's still open, and he doesn't see his grandpa. He goes throughout the house, he's yelling his name, he doesn't see him anywhere. So he goes out, to the back door, and he's yelling his grandpa's name, he doesn't hear it. So he calls up his parents, and his parents come home immediately, and they call the police, and they do this big search throughout the neighborhood and into the woods. And they end up finding his grandfather in the middle of the woods. He is completely naked. He is confused and doesn't know who he is, doesn't know anything, doesn't remember anything. So they bring him back home and everything. Well, Aiden said that, they chalked this up to dementia and said he was diagnosed with a severe case of dementia. But Aiden, in his mind, suspected, because of the series of events that happened before this and his grandfather going out to the kitchen when the door opened, that this was the evil twin thing that his grandfather had talked about. And he said, although his grandfather had completely lost his memory, from time to time, he would say to Aiden, "Is my brother outside? Is my brother out there?" And he couldn't figure out why, like, his grandfather would keep saying that. And then he realized maybe this thing appeared as his brother, and it lured him, like, into the woods. There's an old saying that you should always close your curtains at night because you can allow what's outside to be invited in. Now, this is a story from Eastern Tennessee. There was this man named Levi, and Levi said he lived in this house that was right next to the woods. And he said this particular night, he went to bed as usual, and he started having this dream. And he said in this dream, there was this man staring at him from his bedroom window. Said he had pale white skin, no nose, no mouth, and these solid black eyes. And on top of his head, he had a couple scraggly pieces of hair. And he said he was just looking at him in this dream. And then all of a sudden, he said he heard a voice say, "Come outside." And he wakes up, and he said right away he looked out his window, and sure enough, that man was standing outside of his window. And then he just took off into the woods. So he was kind of a little freaked out by that, but was like, maybe I was just dreaming that still, and it was all in my head. Until he looks at the window, and he sees what looks like a face print. A couple weeks later, David said, he goes to sleep, and this time he has a dream. He's in his house, and he's walking into his kitchen. And he said when he looked out his back kitchen door, he could see this same man, creature, whatever you want to call it, outside on his back porch. And he said this thing was sort of bent over, and it was pacing back and forth, just moving its shoulders. He said it then stopped at the door window, and it turned, and it looked at him, and it said, "Come outside." And he said he woke up, and he was like, man, that dream just felt like really real. So he walks out to his back porch, and he looks, there's no one out there. But when he looks down at the snow on the porch, he can see what look like footprints. So David didn't know, Levi didn't know what to make of this. And he, at the time, just thought, it was just bad nightmares he was having. So a couple weeks later after this, he goes to bed again one night. And he says he has this dream. And in this dream, once again, he's in his bedroom, laying in his bed. And he says he hears the front door open. And he said all of a sudden he heard footsteps kind of, moving through the living room, down the hallway. And then his door opens. And he said in walks this white creature, bent over, with its shoulders kind of moving as it walked. And he said he came right over to his bed, and it sat on his stomach. And he said the whole time he just couldn't move. He said this thing just kind of was like smiling at him as it's sitting on top of him. And he said it turned, and it looked at him, and it said, "I said, come outside." And then he said he lifted up his arm, and it scratched him right on his side. He wakes up, and it was like, that seemed all too real. He lifts up his shirt, and in the place where he got scratched in the dream, he had this huge scratch. And so the next day, he goes to his neighbor's house, and he's like, "Hey, this is going to sound weird, but, like, have you ever seen sort of like a weird guy that's been, looking in windows or anything?" And he said his neighbor just turned and had this, like, shocking look on his face. And he was like, "You mean the pale white guy with, a couple strands of hair and the solid black eyes?" And he's like, "Yeah, how did you know?" And he goes, "When I first moved here, I used to leave my curtains open, and I would see him peeking in my window, and he would tell me to come outside." And he said, so after that, I started keeping my curtains closed at night. And so Levi said after he had heard that, he never slept at night without the curtains closed in his bedroom.
This is a continuation of a series I like to call Why We Don't Play with Ouija Boards. If you're new here, hi. I usually talk about pretty scary stuff, and I actually have an email where anyone finds this page send me the ghost stories. And let me tell you, I get a lot of Ouija board stories. And if I'm going to be completely transparent, none of them have good outcomes. And almost all of them are genuinely terrifying to the point where I think about them. If you're not new here, then I have shared my personal experiences with said subject matter. Very strong advocate on not ever touching one ever. So let's get into it. This is actually a continuation of an email that I received a couple of weeks ago, and I made a video about the first part, but they're completely separate stories that have no correlation to one another. I just thought both were equally as scary. This scary story submission comes from somebody named Teresa, who is actually telling the story on behalf of her grandmother. And when her grandmother was a young girl, she and her friend were playing a Ouija board in the attic of her home. They had nothing but a candle on at the time, which meant that they were sitting in pretty much complete darkness, and they are obviously trying to contact spirits. As they're asking the board questions, they are not receiving any answers. Both her grandma and her grandma's friend got pretty fed up with the no answer thing. Finally, they both got pretty fed up to the point where they said, if there's a spirit here, blow out the candles or something. As the word something came out of their mouths, a glass of water that was sitting on a table close by completely shattered on the ground, water everywhere, glass everywhere, and simultaneously the candle that was lighting the entire room also goes out. Obviously, her grandma and her friend scream, rush downstairs, and never play with the Ouija board ever again. And I already know I'm gonna get a comment that's like, oh, that's it. And that should be all it takes for you to not touch something like that ever again. Because when you see physical manifestations of activity, it is like getting the wind knocked out of you. And if I'm going to be completely honest, your brain just goes on autopilot. It cannot process what it's seeing, especially if it's for the first time. But anyways, that's going to do it for me. Stay tuned for our ghost stories.
Imagine it's 1 a.m. and you get a knock on the door. It's the police, and they tell you they got a 911 call from a landline registered to your address. He said it was a man who called in and said that a woman and her children were hurt and they needed help. You're a single mother, home alone with your 3 children. There's no man in your house, and you don't have a landline phone. I've been telling scary stories on here that you guys have sent to my email. This might be the creepiest one yet. Oh, this one gives me cold chills. So this follower, we'll call her Sage for the sake of the story. She moved to Allen County, Kentucky in August of 2005. It was just Sage and her 3 kids. She had bought a house way out in the boonies. She had one neighbor which lived like an acre away, but the next neighbor was over a mile away. The house was surrounded by woods in the back. She worked late, so she would get home at night and she would run from her car to her door because she was so scared. She said there was always like this sense of impending dread. They would always hear noises and activity coming from the woods that didn't sound like animals. She never felt comfortable in the house either. It always felt like they were being watched. And one night at 1 a.m., she heard someone banging on her front door. She opened the door and there was a police officer standing there. They told her they had received a 911 call from a landline registered to her address. He said it was a man who called that said a woman and her children were hurt and needed help. But she had no house phone. The wires had been cut from the box to the house. There was no man in her house either. Remember, it was just Sage and her 3 kids. After they searched the house and found out nobody was there, the officer left. She went on back to bed. I don't know how you go to bed after that, but she did. But shortly after, someone or something started banging on the back door of her house. She got up to go look and see what was going on, and no one was there. And then she heard footsteps across her roof. The noises continued until dawn, but then everything went silent and she never experienced anything like that ever again. But still, she felt like there was always something watching her from the woods. Y'all, how creepy is that? She ended up moving back to Arizona the next February.
Weird spooky story time, and I think a ghost may have saved him at the Dennis the Menace Park. I received this story, and he says that it still creeps him out to this day. He said it was 2003 and he was 5 years old. He and his family took a trip out to the Monterey Bay. They visited the aquarium, they stayed at a nearby hotel, and one of those days they spent it at the Dennis the Menace Park. For those of you who aren't from the area, there's a big giant train at the park, and you used to actually be able to climb all over it and play on it before they closed it off. He was climbing all over the train, he was playing on it with all the other kids. He said even his dad was playing on the train, and he went into the conductor's area. As he was climbing around in the conductor's area, he heard a voice, a low voice. A man's voice, and it only said one word: no. At first he thought it was just his dad telling him no. He thought maybe he was doing something he wasn't supposed to be doing. But his dad looked at him and he said, "No, I didn't say anything." As he started to play again, he heard the voice again: no. It just kept repeating the same word over and over again. He kept looking around him, but there was no one there who could be making such a loud, low, close sounding voice. There was no adult within earshot, and there was no one who could be saying it to him. Years later, he realized that there is a cemetery right across the street from Dennis the Menace Park. And if you're local, I remember playing on that train, and you could see the cemetery from that train. He said it sounded like it was an older man, and that it was sounded like it was angry with him. He said it was like he was trying to warn him to stop doing something. The voice never said anything else, just no. To this day, he still wonders what that was. He's like, I don't know if it was a trick of the mind or if it was something warning him. Maybe it was the voice of someone who never really left that place. What I think is really cool about this story is that I want to say like a year or two later, that train did get shut down to the public. And the reason for that is because so many kids were getting severely injured. They were falling off, they were falling onto things. I think the city was getting like sued because of it. So it makes you wonder if he, at 5 years old, was doing something that maybe was dangerous that he didn't think was dangerous, and maybe there was a spirit there protecting him. Maybe it was the spirit of the conductor, maybe it was a spirit from someone across the street. I don't know, but who knows? Maybe that spirit telling him no saved him from being hurt or worse. Let me know in the comments what you guys think, or if any of you remember playing at the Dennis the Menace Park and playing on that train, let me know in the comments. And if you've got a spooky story, send it my way. In honor of Women's History Month, I'm doing 31 Days of Women in Horror. Today we are honoring the legendary Jessica Lange. While many people know her from American Horror Story, her horror resume goes back decades. She actually made her film debut in the King Kong from 1976. Yeah, that was her. But horror fans truly embraced her when she became part of the American Horror Story cast. In 2011, she introduced the unforgettable character Constance Langdon in American Horror Story Murder House. Then in 2012, she played Sister Jude in Asylum, and a lot of people think that this was her best performance in the series. And in 2013, she transformed again into the powerful witch Fiona Good in Coven. In 2014, she became Elsa Mars in American Horror Story's Freak Show, and this personally is my favorite character of hers. In my opinion, Jessica Lange's performances in the early seasons of American Horror Story really helped define where that series was going to go. And after a 4-year break, she returns to the series American Horror Stories as Constance Langdon once again, which I love because it reconnects the series to the original first season. Sometimes the most powerful thing in a horror story is just having a commanding appearance. Come back tomorrow for my 31 Days of Women in Horror for Women's History Month.
We had a recent Mothman sighting, and this one is a little concerning. It just happened this past month near Columbia, South Carolina. Now, there was this couple who was driving late at night around 10:30 p.m. As they're going down this highway, they said they noticed something in the road. At first, it appeared like a feral hog, but as they got closer to this thing, they said it resembled a person crouched down. And all of a sudden, it stood up, and it looked like a man that had these very long wings. It looks up to the sky, and it reaches his hands up, and then it took off into the air. This couple then goes over to this area where they seen this thing take off, and they noticed that the area was filled with like static electricity, and it was very warm. There were tremendous amounts of heat in the specific area where this thing took off. And afterwards, they began to feel very nauseous and sick, as if they had encountered something that was some type of chemical. So what do you think? What does the Mothman sighting in South Carolina mean?
This woman lived inside of a wooden box under somebody's bed for 7 years. And she was under the impression that entire time that if she tried to escape, that some secret organization was out to murder her family. In 1977, a 20-year-old woman named Colleen Stan was hitchhiking to a friend's house from Oregon to California. And I know what you're thinking. Why the hell would you as a woman go hitchhiking? And to that I say, back then, hitchhiking was the norm. People did it all the time. So Colleen is hitchhiking and eventually a car pulls over. Inside was a young couple, a man named Cameron Hooker and his wife. So the car pulled over and Colleen was a little bit hesitant at first, but when she saw that there was a woman in the car, it made her feel immensely safe. So she got in. And you guys, I hate that so much. I hate that we feel like we have to trust women. We feel like we can trust women because of what we go through against men. But really, in reality, you can't trust anybody. I have a bunch of other stories about that on my page. Personal stories. So whatever, back on track. At first, it seemed normal. Everything was normal. She got in the car, they talked, they chatted, normal conversation. And they drove for a while when suddenly Cameron pulled over. And without warning, without any kind of hesitation at all, he attacked her. He forced a wooden box over the top of her head, tied her up, and then drove her back to his own home in California. And instead of killing her, Cameron created this coffin-sized, box and put it under his bed. And that's where he kept her. And for the next 7 years, Colleen lived basically her entire existence inside that box. She was kept in there for upwards of 23 hours a day. The box was so small she couldn't even sit upright. And the only time that she was ever let out was to clean the house or cook meals. But honestly, I think the most terrifying part was not the box itself, but the psychological torment that this man put her through. You see, in order to have her safely out of the box and convinced that she can't run away, Cameron convinced her that a secret organization called the Company was watching her. He told her that they had eyes everywhere and that if she tried to escape, then they would catch her and murder her entire family. He even made her sign a fake contract saying that she belongs to them. And after months, years actually, she believed him. She started to believe him. She thought escape meant death to everyone that she knew and loved. And so with that thought in mind, she stayed for 7 years. And what finally ended this nightmare for Colleen was not the police, but Cameron's wife. Over time, she became overwhelmed with the guilt. And I mean, the guilt consumed her to a point where she just went over to Colleen and spilled everything. She told her the entire truth. But of course, she waited until 1984 to do this. 7 years later, she came clean, telling Colleen that there was no such thing as the Company. There had never been a secret organization with eyes everywhere. And soon after this confession to Colleen herself, Cameron's wife did end up going to the police and confessing everything. So the investigators soon arrived to the house, where they found the wooden box under the bed with Colleen's stand inside. And just like that, Colleen was finally free. She had spent 7 years of her life trapped under this man's bed, living in a little coffin, basically only coming out to be the maid and personal chef. And you guys, I just can't imagine how I would go on after surviving something like that. Horrifying, absolutely horrifying experience. But honestly, I think the scariest part of it all was the fact that she wasn't even locked up in chains or constantly secured to the box. It's that they literally got into her mind so badly, so deeply, that she really started to believe everything that they told her. And I think when somebody breaks the barrier of your mind, that is probably the most scary thing that can happen. Be safe out there, guys, and do not trust anybody. I'm sure you already know this. And of course, let me know what you think about this case in the comment. And if you guys have any scary things that have happened to you or cases that you know about, please feel free to send me an email and I can share it on my page for you. I've had a couple people do that and request that I start doing that again. So my email will be in the box below, and I will see you guys tomorrow.
Might have known the story of real-life boogeyman.
Imagine living in a house for 10 years alongside a freezer that has the body of your husband inside of it. And every single month, checks with his name keep arriving in the mail. Well, it's exactly what investigators discovered back in 2019 when they entered a home in Joplin, Missouri. Inside this house was a chest freezer. And inside the chest freezer was a man who had been deceased for over a decade. Let's get into the story, but don't forget to follow me for more. Like, share, and do all of the things so that I can keep making these videos for you. So the man's name was Paul Edward Mathers. He was a U.S. military veteran who had been receiving military checks in the mail. And these were benefits checks that he was receiving from the DVA, Department of Veteran Affairs. And for years and years and years, all of the neighbors around had just believed that he was alive. But the reality inside that home was something so different from anybody's perspective, because police came to the conclusion that Paul probably passed away in 2009. Mind you, it's 2019 when this is taking place. And also, his death was never reported. Instead, he was just placed inside of this chest freezer inside of the house that he shares with his wife, Becky Mathers. And for 10 years, life just continued around this freezer. Like nothing happened, nothing was inside of it. Investigators discovered that Becky was still receiving Paul's VA benefit check this entire 10 years that he had been deceased. They estimate that she got over $100,000 in these checks for herself, which immediately raised one of the biggest questions in this case. Was his body hidden so that she could simply just keep obtaining this money? But when the police began to investigate a little bit further, they discovered a note. Not just any note, a notarized letter. And the document appeared to be written by Paul himself before he died. In it, he claimed that his wife was not responsible for his death. And this letter complicated the entire case even further, because it was suggesting that Paul probably didn't die naturally like they were thinking that probably, I don't know. I don't know. But even if that were true, even if that were the case and he didn't die naturally, why would your first move be to put him inside of a chest freezer? That I just don't get. And how she lived in that house for 10 years knowing that he was in the freezer, I don't know. I just don't know how she did it. So how this came to light, basically the VA got suspicious. They called it in to the police saying that there was suspicious activity revolving the VA, benefit checks and the money involved. So a welfare check was actually the reason why the police got involved. So the police were sent over to the home for a welfare check on Paul. And when they got to the property and searched the property, they opened up that chest freezer and guess what they found inside? I don't know how police officers do things like this. Like, they literally opened up that freezer, saw preserved remains, and had to keep it together. They had to keep that shit together. Kudos to you guys. Kudos to you guys. Because not only was that a shocking moment for the investigators, I'm sure it was a traumatizing one as well. Dude, just imagine living in a house with a body that's been in the freezer for 10 years, knowing that the body is in the freezer and has been in the freezer for 10 years. You're just going about your life, milling about your life, watching TV, cooking dinner, having friends over probably, sleeping in the same house. Just existing in the same house that a deceased person is in. Cases like this usually fascinate psychologists because it shows compartmentalization. I think that's how you pronounce that word. Compartmentalization? That's basically where a person is able to separate two different things or multiple different things from their life. Like the reality versus the other reality that I'm just not going to acknowledge. Like they literally just separate reality from the rest of their life. If that makes any sense. Look it up. Look into it. Because that is how people can act completely normal in situations like this. Where you have committed such a horrendous act, but your brain is able to compartmentalize that so that you just act completely normal or ignore it somehow, some way, some why. It's just incredibly disturbing to me, but fascinating to me. The same as psychologists. I just want to know, did she ever touch that freezer again? Did she open it up? Because there had to have been some kind of power outage in the 10 years that she's lived there. Freezers break. Sometimes they need maintenance. And if that happened, then that means that she had to have opened up that freezer every so often to check on him and see him in there. So how she could forget and compartmentalize that somewhere else in her brain, I don't know. These people are, I just can't get over that. What if the freezer broke and you gotta open that and just be confronted with what you did? There's not a shred of guilt that happened in the 10 years, and why? I want to know why she did that. And there is speculation on what the motive was. The first and obvious one is the financial survival thing about it. If those VA checks were the main source of income, then the death of Paul would have stopped those from coming in. So in that scenario, if Paul had passed away naturally, then she could have had a motive to hide the body, if that meant to preserve the only financial stability that she had, which that's insane. I have no words. Another speculation is that she just panicked. Sometimes when somebody dies, the person closest to them just reacts crazily, doesn't know what to do, and then just ends up making a terrible, horrifying, horrible decision in that moment. I don't know, they hide the body thinking that maybe it's only going to be temporary, but days turns into weeks, and weeks turns into months, and months turn into years, and then the lie just keeps building and building and building and getting harder and harder to cover up, until eventually the lie becomes something that they can never truly admit. Because how can you admit that you reacted in that kind of a way. There's other speculation that maybe she could have been in denial. In some rare psychological cases, people cannot fathom the fact that their loved one has passed on. And I've seen this in other cases that I've talked about and read about and researched. And one of them is that the guy who made human dolls. I'll get into that again some other time, not in this. But I think that is more of an example of that, like, psychological, undoing rather than this, because she just kept him in the freezer. She didn't do anything else with him. She didn't cuddle him. She didn't, I don't know. She didn't seem like she really cared about him. I don't know. When cases like this are uncovered, people mostly focus on the crime aspect of it all. But I think the most disturbing part of it is the quietness of it all. And it just makes me think, every time that I drive by somebody's house, I never truly know what's going on inside. I don't know if somebody's being held captive in there. I don't know if somebody's being abused in there. You really never truly know what's going on in somebody else's life. And I think that that might be the most terrifying part of this whole ordeal. Because there are people out there right now, going through something similar to Paul, or being a fucking psychotic bitch like Becky. I don't know. You guys let me know what you think about this case. Let me know what you think her motive really truly was. I think I'm leaning more towards the money thing, but truthfully, I don't know. Anyways, you guys, this is your reminder to stay safe out there. Don't trust anyone, not even the ones that you think are the closest to you, which I know is a horrifying thing to say, but safety comes first. I love you guys. Bye.
Hey TikTok, I'm back with another spooky, scary story. So make sure y'all get y'all snacks, turn the lights off, get your blankets, get comfortable, and make sure you listening, okay? So this story time takes part in my early years of being on this earth. I was 2 years old, my mom said. And so it was just me and her in this apartment that we were in at this time. And my mom and me were sitting on the couch. We was playing the game or we was watching something. She can't really remember which one it was, but just kind of picture that. My mom is sitting on this side of the couch and I'm sitting all the way on the edge of the couch, right? But I'm sitting on the edge and I'm talking to somebody that is not there. And like I said in multiple videos, my mom is very spiritual. So she's asking me who could you possibly be talking to? I tell her I'm talking to Grandpa. Now mind you, I said just me and my mom in the apartment right now. So how could I be talking to my grandpa, right? So my mom just brushes it off. She just ignores it until I keep talking to somebody that is really not supposed to be there. I guess I just came up to her and I was like, Mom, I want to go with Grandpa. And she was like, you are going to go with Grandpa. But when she said that, she was referring to her father, right? Me and her father was supposed to do something. So she thought that I was talking about him. But I was adamant on, no, I want to go with that grandpa, that specific grandpa that is standing right there. And so my mom was just like, what the fuck, that's weird. But she, again, just brushed it off. So fast forward to later on that day, my mom says, I come running up to her saying that I want to go fishing with grandpa. My mom ends up asking, what grandpa are you talking about? And I'm like, that grandpa standing right there, still saying it, right? So my mom was like, what does he look like? What does he have on? And she's basically asking me questions. And so I start describing what her great-grandfather looked like, all the way down from the hair, the outfit, the skin tone, everything. She said I had it down to a T. And at this time in my life, I want to mention, I did not know what my great-grandfather looked like. He passed away before I was even born. And even if I did see a quick little picture of him, I was only 2 years old, so I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have remembered his face, being that he's not around me every single day. She basically said the part that stood out the most was the fact that I said he had a black and red jacket. And my mom, thinking she doesn't know the difference between a jacket and a coat, but she also did tell me that when my great-grandfather was basically being buried, he was being laid to rest in a black and red coat, not a black and red jacket. And so she showed me a picture of my great-grandfather, and I was like, yes, that's him. That's my grandpa that I've been talking about. He's standing right there. She just put me on her lap and started crying, and that was it. After that encounter, I didn't see him again. I guess I didn't talk about him to her, and that was really it. But also, I want to mention one more thing that I found really spooky, but kind of heartwarming at the same time. So 3 days before my great-grandfather passed away, right? Remember, never met him a day in my life, but he was on his deathbed, obviously, and he couldn't make any facial expressions. He couldn't open his eyes. He couldn't talk. He couldn't do anything. The most he could do was cry. This one night, my mom spent the whole night just talking to him about everything and how she found out she was pregnant, and all he could do was cry, like I said. He randomly got this, urge and strength to speak out, and the words that he said was, "It's a girl." So basically he told her, "You're gonna be pregnant with a girl," before she even knew what my gender was. Yeah, that whole story is freaking crazy. If you love stories like this, definitely check out my page and hit that follow button.
I need to tell you guys this ghost story. This story was sent into my email, and if you have any ghost stories, paranormal encounters, or scary stories that you'd like to share, you can send them to the email in my bio. There's always been something strange about my parents' bedroom. It's hard to explain, but the energy in that room has always felt wrong. The energy in that room was so strong and prevalent that even a friend of mine had felt it too. Neither of us ever said it out loud at first, but we both quietly agreed on one thing. Whatever was in that room, it was in the closet. Every so often, I babysat my baby sister, and when she naps, I'll sometimes lay her down in my parents' bed for a quick rest. One afternoon, I was completely exhausted. I lay down on the bed and fell asleep almost instantly, but I had forgotten one thing. The closet door was open, and while I napped, I had a dream. In my dream, I saw a man standing in the room. He was smiling. At first, he looked normal, but the longer I stared at him, the more something about his face began to feel odd, uncanny, like a human face trying to imitate emotion, but getting it slightly off. His smile stretched too wide. His eyes felt empty. And the longer he looked at me, the more I realized there was something deeply malevolent about him. Then suddenly, I felt something grab my foot, and I was dragged, pulled off of the bed. When I woke up, my heart was racing. The blankets were thrown off of the mattress, and I was halfway hanging off of the bed, with my foot dangling over the exact same side where I had felt myself being dragged. After that night, I started taking precautions. Now, whenever I sleep in that room, I hang rosaries on every door. I place a statue of the Virgin Mary over the closet doorknob. I keep a Bible open to Psalms under my bed, and I pray every night before I fall asleep, because that smiling man didn't disappear right away. For a while, he kept appearing in my dreams, sometimes standing in the background, sometimes just watching, but always smiling. Once I started praying every night, though, the dreams finally stopped, at least for now, because sometimes when I walk past that closet, I still feel the same thing, like something on the other side of that door is quietly waiting.
Do you guys mind if we sit here and talk about Ellen DeGeneres for a second? Because her story, it's a really interesting story. At one point in her life, she was one of Hollywood's biggest success stories. Now, not so much. Ellen Lee DeGeneres was born on January 26, 1958 in Louisiana. She did not come from Hollywood. She came from a regular Southern family. But her childhood, by her own account, was not easy. When her parents got divorced, her mother remarried a man by the name of Roy. Years later, Ellen would reveal that her stepfather, Roy, as a teenager. Using the pretext of her mother's cancer diagnosis, he would use that excuse to put his hands on her. He would say that her mom had lumps on her, so he had to feel Ellen just to be safe. She was roughly 15, 16 years old at the time. She told her mother did not believe her. In fact, she stayed married to that man for 18 more years. Ellen started doing stand-up comedy in New Orleans in the 1980s, dropping out of the University of New Orleans after exactly one semester. She did well enough there that she started working her way up to bigger and better things, but her big break came in 1986 when Johnny Carson called her one of the funniest people in America after she appeared on his show, The Tonight Show. It was her first appearance on national television, and she was the first female comedian on that specific show. That put Ellen on the national radar. By the early 1990s, she had made the move to LA, and she was having conversations about her next move. Then in 1994, she joined the ABC sitcom These Friends of Mine. That show was renamed Ellen after only the first season, and by the third season, it was regularly placing in the top 20 most watched shows on American television. Ellen DeGeneres was what everyone called a rising star. But then things changed for her because by 1996, rumors had started to circulate. Rumors that both Ellen, the character that she played on the show, as well as Ellen, the real person, were gay. And Ellen's character on the show was building toward doing something that no American network television series had ever done, making its lead character openly gay. And then the episode came out where Ellen's lead character in the show came out to her therapist. An estimated 42 million Americans watched that episode. It was nearly 3 times the show's normal view count. That happened at the same time that Ellen DeGeneres came out in real life. In April of 1997, she appeared on the cover of Time magazine next to the words, "Yep, I'm gay," making her TV's first openly gay star, according to the article. So she began openly dating another female actress, and Ellen DeGeneres was then unable to find work for the following 3 years. Quote, "I did what was right. I came out, which was good for me, and ultimately it was the only thing I could do. And then I got punished for it. I was so angry. I was just so angry," end quote. Keep in mind, this was in the 90s, so things were different back then. The ratings of the show declined very quickly shortly after that episode aired, and it was ultimately canceled completely in 1998. Ellen DeGeneres quite literally didn't know what to do. A second sitcom called The Ellen Show on CBS ran just 13 episodes before that was canceled in 2002 because it was not performing well at all. She described herself in interviews as depressed, broke, and professionally blacklisted. She had done something genuinely brave, and she was paying a very real price for it. Her girlfriend at the time was Anne Hesh. The two dated from 1997 to 2000. They broke up in August of 2002, with both sides initially describing the breakup to have been amicable, but years later, Anne told a very different story. She came out and said that Ellen had been extremely controlling throughout the entirety of the relationship, and that after their breakup, Ellen used the connections that she had to stop Anne from getting movie roles and or different opportunities. She claimed that the fallout from that relationship damaged her career significantly, and that Ellen had been working behind the scenes to silence her for years. That was kind of the first person who really knew Ellen to speak out and say negative things about her, like someone who was really, really close to her in real life. In September of 2003, Ellen made a comeback. She practically rebuilt her TV career with a talk show that I'm sure every single person in the world knows about. The Ellen DeGeneres Show premiered on daytime television. Nobody was sure that it would work. Ellen had just finished her role in Finding Nemo. She's the voice of Dory, if you guys didn't know. And obviously that was incredibly successful, but just because she was successful in her voice playing Dory didn't mean that she could count on her talk show succeeding as well, but succeed it did. The format of the show was simple. Ellen danced onto the stage at the beginning of every single video. She gave away prizes, surprised people with career-changing gifts, made celebrities play ridiculous games, and ended every single show with the same 4 words or 5 words. She either always said be kind or be kind to one another. For a generation of daytime viewers, Ellen DeGeneres was sunshine in human form. People saw her as proof that you could be gay, you could be yourself, you could survive Hollywood's cruelty and come out the other side. At its peak in a single week in February of 2014, The Ellen Show averaged nearly 4.6 million viewers per episode. Over its 19-season run, it won 64 daytime Emmy Awards, including 12 for Outstanding Entertainment Talk Show. In 2016, Ellen was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom. She hosted the Academy Awards twice, met just about every single celebrity in Hollywood, and became one of the most defining pop culture's image of the social media era. Ellen DeGeneres was not just a talk show, she was a brand, and she was powerful. But behind the set, with a dancing audience and the Be Kind sign, something else was building. Before things hit the fan for Ellen in 2020, cracks were already beginning to show. Hollywood had been whispering about the noticeable difference between the person Ellen was when she was on TV versus the person that Ellen was in real life. In 2007, a former writer of the show said publicly that she treated her staff horribly. In 2016, Kathy Griffin wrote in her book about, quote, a beloved daytime talk show host with a, quote, mean streak that all of Hollywood talks about, later confirming that she was talking about Ellen. That same year, actor Brad Garrett posted on social media, quote, sorry, but it comes from the top at The Ellen Show. No more than than one who were treated horribly by her, common knowledge, end quote. To which a different actress, Leah Thompson, replied simply, quote, true story, it is. There were cracks, but in the celebrity culture of the time, a mean boss was not exactly breaking news, and in the eyes of majority of the public back then, all of the good that Ellen did outweighed any of the bad. But then she started doing things on camera, on screen, that were a little bit like, that's weird. For example, in 2008, Mariah Carey appeared on The Ellen Show while she was pregnant, but she had not yet publicly announced it. During the interview, Ellen repeatedly pressed her to confirm her pregnancy on camera, at one point offering her drink to see if she would take it, because if she didn't, that would mean that she was pregnant, essentially forcing her to make a public confirmation. Mariah Carey was visibly uncomfortable and she tried to deflect and change the subject, but Ellen just kept pushing. She later revealed that she had actually suffered a miscarriage not long after that appearance, and said that Ellen's on-air pressure had forced her to confirm the pregnancy before she was ready. In October of 2019, Dakota Johnson appeared on The Ellen Show, and the interview took an uncomfortable turn that was captured on camera and went massively viral. On air, Ellen mentioned that she had not been invited to Dakota's 30th birthday party, framing it as a joke, but Dakota pushed back directly, telling Ellen on camera that she had in fact been invited and that she had simply not come. The whole interaction was visibly awkward, with Dakota holding her ground while Ellen appeared to be caught in a public lie. And that clip was everywhere on social media because it felt like a rare moment in which a celebrity guest refused to play along with Ellen's whole camera persona. However, it wasn't until 2020 when things really went south for Ellen, because people started wondering if the person that Ellen was in front of the camera was anything like the person that she was off camera. Because one person said that Ellen was rude to them, and then another one, and then another one, and it kind of just felt like a domino effect. On July 17th of 2020, journalist Christy Lee had spoken to 11 current and former employees of the Ellen DeGeneres show. What they described was a workplace that bore no resemblance whatsoever to the place of happiness that Ellen said she wanted to create on day one. The allegations were specific and in many cases corroborated by multiple sources. Allegedly, staff members were instructed by managers not to speak to Ellen DeGeneres if they passed her in the hallways. One employee who had taken medical leave following an unaliving attempt returned to work and was told that they no longer had a job. Another one was reprimanded for starting a GoFundMe account to cover medical costs not covered by insurance and was ordered to take it down. A third was fired after taking bereavement days for 2 separate family funerals in the same calendar year. A different former staff member stated, quote, "It irritates me that people think she's all sweetness and light and she gets away with it," end quote. And another one, quote, "That be kind only happens when the cameras are on. It's all for the show," end quote. A different former employee also talked on a podcast about how Ellen's treatment towards her employees meant that there was always a lot of crying in the hallways. And then, which real quick, yes, people are mean and rude and that's not groundbreaking news, it's not shocking, but when you have an entire show based on being kind and you tell your audience at the end of every episode to be kind to one another, but then it comes out that allegedly you are not kind at all, now you're not only mean, but you're also hurting your reputation and credibility. Because again, now you're not only rude, but now you have people looking at you like, little bit of a hypocrite, you know what I mean? Anyway, so you guys know the comedian Kevin Porter. In March of 2020, he goes to Twitter and says, quote, "Ellen DeGeneres is notoriously one of the meanest people alive. Respond to this with the most insane stories you've heard about Ellen being mean, and I will match everyone with a $2 donation to the Los Angeles Food Bank," end quote. He got thousands of responses. So you have a bunch of former employees alleging that Ellen sucks pretty much, but that's not all, because then 36 more allegations surface, all from former employees, not only against Ellen, but also against 3 of the show's executive producers directly. There were more than 10 allegations of against executive producer and head writer Kevin Lemon. 5 allegations of touching were made against executive producer Ed Glavin, and executive producer Jonathan Norman was accused by one former employee of attempting to perform on him, with 3 other employees corroborating that that employee had told him about the incident at the time. All 3 producers denied the allegations, but all of that talk leads to Warner Media, the corporate entity behind the show, to begin an investigation looking into all these different allegations. Executive producers Ed Glavin and Kevin Lemon were fired, and Jonathan Norman also ended up leaving. Ellen addressed the entire situation on season 18 premiere in September of 2020. She called her summer great, sarcastically, and then said, quote, "I'm so sorry to the people that were affected. I take responsibility for what happens on my show," end quote. She also joked, quote, "Being known as the kind lady is a tricky position to be in," end quote. For many former employees and viewers, the apology felt pretty empty. Also, not everything that I'm telling you guys has been confirmed to be 100% true. Let's make that clear. I'm not accusing anything of anyone. I'm just explaining Ellen's career path, okay? But it's up to you guys to form your own opinion. On that note, do you guys remember this guy? Yeah, unfortunately, I do too. I have to say that in hindsight, one of the clips from Ellen's show that doesn't quite feel right is one from 2020 when Ellen surprised a group of 8 children with cancer with him. Granted, back then, nobody knew the despicable things that this man was doing in secret, but him being affectionate with these little kids, I don't know. It doesn't help that her birthday tweet to him refers to him by name, but ends with, quote, or as I call him, Cuddle McNuggle stuff. You don't need to know why, end quote. If that makes you feel weird, you're not alone. The Ellen Show ended in May of 2022. The final episode was filmed April 18th of 2022 after 19 seasons. But before we finish this video, let's go back to Ellen's ex-girlfriend, Anne Hesh, because she is no longer with us. In August of 2022, Anne Hesh crashed her car into a house in Mar Vista in Los Angeles. The car went up in flames. She very sadly sustained severe burns and brain damage. She was placed on life support and passed on August 11th of 2022. The LA County coroner ruled it as accidental, stating substances were found in her system at the time of the crash. Her passing brought her and Ellen's relationship back into conversation because of how unexpected and awful it was. Anne had also publicly discussed working on a project in relation to online. The combinations of these facts, the accusations against Ellen, the project that Anne was working on, and her sudden passing was enough to generate a wave of theories that the accident was not just as it seemed. However, there is no evidence that foul play was involved, and the official ruling of it being accidental remains the same. 4 months later, on December 13th of 2022, the entertainment world was hit again. Steven Twitch Boss, the beloved choreographer, DJ, and executive producer of The Ellen Show, was found at a hotel in Los Angeles. He was 40 years old. His wife Allison had arrived at a LAPD station that morning to report that he had left home without his car, which was unusual. When authorities found him, a note was found near his body, presumably one that Twitch himself wrote, meaning that he left by choice. The medical examiner ruled that the cause of death was a self-inflicted wound to the head with no signs of foul play. Twitch had joined the Ellen DeGeneres show as a guest DJ in 2014. In 2020, he was promoted to executive producer. He was universally beloved by the audience, by his colleagues, by those who had worked with him and for him. Another choreographer that was close to Twitch stated that after the 2020 toxic workplace scandal, Twitch had come under immense pressure for publicly supporting Ellen. Quote, people were looking at him like, why are you still supporting this woman? End quote. He stated that he believed that Twitch's mental health had deteriorated significantly in the period following the scandal. So there were people who knew him who had noticed a change in his behavior, but on the other side of that argument, when he passed, his wife only received half of his estate because Twitch did not have a will, which is incredibly odd in a lot of people's opinions. Ellen released a statement, quote, I'm heartbroken. Twitch was pure love and light. He was family and I loved him with all my heart. I will miss him, end quote. The internet was not satisfied with that, and people on the internet once again began to speculate. So there is no credible evidence that Twitch's passing was anything other than what the official investigators concluded that it was. And you guys know I'm not going to tell you anything other than the truth and the actual rulings, but I just thought that it was important to mention because in 2022 and to this day, a significant portion of the internet refuses to accept that Twitch's passing was a result of his choice. So I want to know what you guys have to say about that. Ellen DeGeneres moved to the UK in November of 2024 with her wife Portia, and it sounds like she's still there living a quiet life, living a life out of the spotlight. Although I did read something about her recently purchasing a $27 million mansion in California, those sources state that it's a temporary winter stay and that the couple does plan on returning back to England. As for her career, she said that she is done with the entertainment industry entirely. Yeah, I keep seeing so many conspiracy theories about Ellen on TikTok, and I've said this before, I would not consider myself to be into conspiracy theories. I like to stick to the facts because too many things, it gets noisy up here, okay? But I would be lying if I said that I didn't think there was something fishy here. I don't know. Anyway, that's it. Let me know your thoughts. Thank you for spending time with me today. Hope you guys are having the best day. If not, go do something to make it the best day. Make somebody happy, and I will see you in my next video. Massive kiss on the forehead to every single one of you.
We are back with another Trini Paranormal, Trini Scary Story, Trini Folklore for you today, and I know plenty of you will see this in the afternoon time or 2 o'clock in the morning, and you're gonna be like, why they showing up on my TikTok this hour day? And I'm gonna be like, to give you a little scare, to give you a little something, to jolt your nervous system a little bit, right? To give you a little excitement before you go to sleep, or if you're just scrolling in the middle of the night. Anyways, so I have a quick story for you all. It's very scary. You all let me know what you think happened with our follower. As you would realize, I'm not here with my mic because it suddenly decided to die on me. And I usually charge these things just for these videos, so that's very spooky. But anyway, our person said, hey, I would like to stay anonymous. This is a haunting where I used to live. I lived with my grandmother who passed away on my birthday, which was the 10th of January 2016. A few days after the funeral, I went upstairs by myself. Nobody was home, only me. When I got upstairs, I smelled cigarettes. Mind you, my grandmother used to smoke. I then started to hear her door handle rattling and shaking, and things were falling down. When I opened the room, all her clothes and her books were scattered all around as if somebody was in the room. Ever since then, when I go upstairs, I will always smell a cigarette and stuff. I would hear stuff falling and knocking in the walls like somebody was in the walls. I moved out of there, but the smell of cigarettes and the knocking never went away, as if her spirit followed me to wherever I am living now. Okay, so I want to know what you all think it is, because I have theories, and it's just theories that I used to hear old people say. So, one, it could be that his grandmother did not cross over and she attached herself to him. Other people tend to believe that if you grieve a lot, like if you are grieving heavily, the spirit just feels sorry and they don't go where they have to go, so they will latch on to you too. Others say that sometimes it could be spirits that are roaming. So for example, if you go to bury or you go to cremate in the cremation site, there would usually be like spirits that are roaming around there who didn't cross over, and they will latch on to you and they will follow you wherever you are going. Or it could be an evil entity, something scary. So let me know, what do you all think has followed our follower home?